And good evening, one and all, and welcome to the X Zone. My name is Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I am your host. I am your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. The X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern, right here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, iHeartRadio, and for all our listeners in Oregon on AM 1600 KOHI. My guest this hour is the Reverend Dr. Barry Downing, who I had the pleasure of having on the show many years ago. In fact, it was Reverend Dr. Downing who was one of the very first people who talked openly about UFOs in the Bible. He is the pastor emeritus of Northminster Presbyterian Church in Endwell, New York. He holds a degree in physics from Hartwick College, a divinity degree from Princeton Theological Seminary, and a Ph.D. from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, where he majored in the relation between science and religion. He published The Bible and Flying Saucers in 1968. That was 50 years ago, Exonation. And Biblical UFO Revelations in 2017. He is listed in the Who's Who in Theology and Science and has been a consultant in religion to the Mutual UFO Network since 1972. He has appeared in several of the History Channel productions of Ancient Alien series. And going back to 1997, Barry and I were part of the BBC special Contact. Joining me now is the Reverend Dr. Barry Downing. And Barry, welcome back to the X Zone. It is so good to have you with us again.
Okay, and it's good to be here. Glad that it's worked out.
My gosh, 50 years. Did you?
Yes. Yes, go ahead.
That kind of throws you back saying, holy cow. When you wrote your first book going back 50 years ago, what did you think the impact would be, and what changes have you seen in ufology over the years?
Okay, I guess I could say that I over-anticipated a big reaction to my book when it first came out. Mm-hmm. And there was a reaction. There was some reaction, more local, okay? It certainly raised the eyebrows in my congregation somewhat. But I think in general, the congregation handled it well. At the same time, the people not in the congregation were saying in the neighborhood, my gosh, the Presbyterian Church has a UFO nut as a pastor, so you had that kind of thing going. Mm-hmm. The basic reviews of my book were negative from, we'll say, religious people. I mean, the Los Angeles Times gave it a good review, but I don't think the woman who reviewed it was a seminary graduate. But the conservatives wished it had never been published, and the liberals thought it was kind of a joke. So those were kind of the two reactions from the two wings, especially of Protestantism.
Right.
I wasn't paying close enough attention at the time, but Catholics were more open to what I was saying than Protestants. And part of that I come to realize is that Catholics believe that miracles can happen almost any day.
Right.
Often it's the Virgin Mary showing up here or there, but it doesn't blow the Catholic's mind to think of the possibility that angels might show up. And whereas for Protestants, conservative Protestants think that once the Bible was written and the canon was decided on, God didn't do any more miracles. That was enough. And so when conservatives criticize my work, often they say Downing relies more on experience than the Bible. Experience is kind of like a deadly word to conservative Protestants. It means you're cheating, you're looking for God right here and now. And you shouldn't do that. You should just look in the Bible. So that's kind of Protestant conservative reaction. Liberal Protestants, well, remember the death of God theology was just getting going as I was about to be ordained. I mean, this is really bad timing, that God is pronounced dead just as I'm about to begin my ministry. So, but at the same time, it's precisely because of the issues that led to the death of God that I had done the Bible and Flying Saucers. The issues that led to the death of God is that smart, educated people said, we can't believe in this miraculous stuff in the Bible anymore. Things like the parting of the Red Sea or the resurrection of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, one of my seminary professors in teaching a class on doctrine was talking about the Apostles' Creed. In the Apostles' Creed, we read, Jesus was crucified,
Yes.
dead, and buried. He descended into hell. The third day he rose again from the dead, ascended into heaven, and sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. And the professor said, no one today believes in the ascension, do they? And if Jesus didn't ascend, where is his body? We may only suppose it lies buried somewhere in the Middle East. Well, I'd say my jaw dropped about 3 feet, if it could have, when I heard that, because, what am I going to say at a funeral,
Yeah.
I would say, now, folks, 20 years ago, I would have said that we know grandma's in heaven now and we're happy about that. But I just graduated from seminary and learned we don't say that anymore. Grandma's gone bye-bye and that's it, I just found it extremely difficult to think about trying to be a pastor without having confidence in the biblical message. At the same time, as you already mentioned, I had a degree in physics. I respected science. And so when my professor said the reason we don't believe in the ascension is because biblical people didn't have our cosmology. They thought heaven was straight up, hell was below the earth, and the earth was in the middle. We know none of that is true now, and therefore there was no ascension. And I thought, we see airplanes going up into the air.
Yeah.
We don't think it's because we believe in a 3-decker universe. It's because we know planes take off and they fly somewhere. How do we know that whatever Jesus did after his resurrection and his ascension, maybe his ascension was to someplace we just don't know about? So that was my thinking, but I felt I needed some educational support for that. So I went to the University of Edinburgh and studied my Ph.D. there and did my dissertation on Isaac Newton and his concepts of time and space. And while I was doing that, I kind of tumbled into the idea that maybe we should look at the Bible from the space age point of view. Maybe we should look at for the possibility that there are UFOs in the Bible, because I'd already been reading about UFOs from Donald Kehoe and people like that.
Right.
Kind of how I fell into it.
What kind of changes have you seen in ufology over the years, Barry?
All right. First of all, I was invited to be part of the Mutual UFO Network by the person who organized it in 1972. And I published many articles in the MUFON UFO Journal over the years. It was Walter Andrus who started MUFON. And I was pretty well accepted there, except by Christian fundamentalists who complained about me quite a bit. But other than that, MUFON treated me pretty well. And it was good that I had MUFON, because by and large, very few churches invited me to speak. Maybe 3 or 4 in the area invited me to speak. By and large, I was invited to speak to UFO organizations. So I kept in the UFO game, I guess I'd say, because of my involvement with MUFON. In terms of the changes, I would say where we are now, fewer people care about the Bible than they did 50 years ago. And in some ways, I think fewer people care about UFOs now than they did 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a sense in which UFOs were talked about to the point where you just say, well, they're either there or they're not. The government's either lying or it isn't. Who knows? It's interesting to read the Wikipedia article on unidentified flying objects, because the whole thing reads along the lines that it might be a government statement. There's no real scientific proof that UFOs are real or anything like that. At the same time, you've got so many UFO sightings that they have types of UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
They're large triangular craft or triangle light patterns. They're cigar-shaped craft or lighted windows, cylinders. It's kind of wild. that there are no UFOs, and yet there's so many of them. We've got types,
Exactly.
So
Barry, we're going to have to take our commercial break. Please stand by. Explanation, our very special guest this hour is Reverend Dr. Barry Downing. And if you'd like to find out more information about Dr. Downing, the Reverend Dr. Barry Downing, excuse me, sir, just Google his name, and all the information will be found there on his books and the several articles he has written. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Don't go away. And welcome back, everyone. Reverend Dr. Barry Downing is my special guest this hour. And we're talking to the good Reverend about Bibles and the flying saucers. Wow, 50 years in this field, Barry. Are we any closer to disclosure now than we were, let's say, 10 years ago?
Well, we must be assuming you put disclosure as an X somewhere in the future or 10 years closer. But whether or not that's 100 years to go, I don't know. I want to comment a bit more where we left off.
Yes, please, sir.
Please, sir. Yeah. Obviously, a key part of my argument is that a UFO, pillar cloud by day and pillar fire by night, was a critical part of the Exodus, including parting the Red Sea. In we'll say educational circles now, if your children went to a university and went to a class on religion, what would they read about Moses? According to Wikipedia, the consensus on Moses now is that he was a literary figure like Hamlet in a Shakespeare play. In other words, that Moses never existed. So if that's where scholarship is now, you can see how little chance my arguments have to be taken seriously, because most college people and professors don't think UFOs are real either. So,
but if
UFOs,
if Moses didn't exist, then the first 4 books of the Bible were written by who?
Well, they would say by editors. Okay, yeah. But in any case, until I would say the government or somebody convinces us that UFOs are real, then what kind of arguments I'm making don't have much of a chance of making an dent on either what you would call liberal theological scholarship or what I would call, religious studies courses in our universities. So, our children are mostly being brought up that there is no evidence of God. The universe was, or rather, life on Earth just evolved, and religions are things that were made up, either starting out with idolatry to begin with, but now maybe just our own ideas that there might be a God, but it doesn't have much impact on life. So God has been like poured through the sieve of American intellectualism, I would say, in the past 50 years, and not much God left. And I don't think anybody's asked what happens to a culture that goes godless. And of course, I don't know what the answer is. A lot of things in our culture now don't look good to me.
Yeah.
Kids shooting kids in school and that kind of stuff. What about it? And so I don't know. I believe that the truth matters. It might be that releasing UFO information would do damage to much of the Christian tradition. Christian fundamentalists of some type argue that UFOs are real, but they're demons. Clifford Wilson, John Weldon, Timothy Daley, Bates, these are all guys that have argued for the demonic theory of UFOs. And then Chuck Missler and Mark Eastman have argued that they may be fallen angels. Okay, I don't buy either of these theories, but at the same time, that's what the conservative wing of Protestantism has argued. Whether or not the release of UFO information would change their minds in a good way, I don't know. But in any case, I think that the release of UFO information would change our science almost as much as our religion, because I can't imagine that the aliens that appear to have been flying in our skies not only just since 1947, but probably thousands of years. I can't imagine they've not impacted the development of life on Earth. This isn't the same as Genesis chapters 1 through 3, but at the same time, it means that intelligent design has been involved in the development of life on Earth, that we are what we are because some higher beings have decided we're going to exist and be what we are. I think just that would have a spiritual transforming power on our culture, and I think our culture needs it. As it is now, I think we're just in spiritual freefall.
What do you think is the most important biblical passage linking UFOs and the Bible, Barry?
It's Exodus chapter 14, starting at verse 19. This is the passage that deals with the parting of the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
In chapter 13 of Exodus, it's interesting, the Jewish people have been liberated from Pharaoh and slavery in Egypt following Passover. And when they get out of Egypt a ways, they now announce that something is leading them. And that's called a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And that's Exodus 13, verses 21 and 22. And it says, the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. So this is an announcement that that thing was going to be there for all the rest of the Exodus, which lasted 40 years. What is a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night? Well, no one in official theology knows. If you read the Interpreter's Bible, the chapter or the book of Exodus explanation, it says it's basically mythological, meaning it didn't exist. And I don't blame them. I have the 1952 edition of the Interpreter's Bible. A lot of ministers have this set. It's a 12-volume set. And so I can't say it's their fault because they didn't think about the pillar of cloud and fire being some type of spaceship. But once you think of the possibility that the pillar of cloud is a spaceship, suddenly the parting of the Red Sea becomes very interesting. Because the Bible says, first of all, the pillar of cloud and fire of the Exodus UFO led Israel up to the Red Sea, which looks like a really dumb move because Pharaoh and his chariots are coming up behind, and the sea is going to keep the Jews from escaping. They're all going to be killed, unless the pillar of cloud and fire has the technology or the power to cause the water to split, which of course we all know happened because it's such a famous story. But in any case, the Bible says that the parting of the Red Sea was done probably by this power. Now, most interpreters try to explain the parting of the Red Sea by maybe a strong wind coming up at just the right time. But the biblical view is that the power for the parting came from the Lord, and the Lord is in the pillar of cloud and fire. Eventually, verses like 25 and 26, we find the pillar of cloud and fire is hovering directly over the open sea channel. I believe that it used its propulsion system, whatever that is, to split the waters. And if anyone buys the latest the version of my book that's out now, Biblical UFO Revelations, you'll see the cover story is the story of the parting of the Red Sea with Moses walking through the open channel and a UFO hovering up above. But in any case, when Jewish people had made it to high and dry on the other side, something interesting happened. The chariots of Egypt followed in the open channel, and suddenly something went wrong. And the Jewish people are on the other side, and they're probably in a prayer that goes something like this. Oh, God, thank you for saving us. Thank you for parting the water. That's a fantastic miracle. I never would have thought of it. Wouldn't even have prayed for it. By the way, if you look lately, the Egyptians are using the same channel. Come and get us.
Yeah.
What kind of a miracle is this? So they are not really safe yet. And we all know that the walls of water then collapsed and drowned the Egyptians. The odd thing is that they include this bit in chapters 24 and 25 and 26. The Lord in the pillar of cloud and of fire looked down upon the host of the Egyptians, doing something to the chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And this is where there's a dispute. The translators of the Revised Standard Version put in the word clogging, as if the chariots were driving mud. And yet 3 times in the text, it says Israel crossed on dry ground. If some type of power system was used to split the waters, there's a good chance there was a microwave effect that dried out the seabed too, so that it would have been dry. What else might have been happening to cause problems for the chariot wheels? If you look in the Revised Standard Version of the translation of the word clogging, there's a Q after it, and that's your cue to look at the foot of the page because the translators fudged. They couldn't make sense of the real word that's there, and the real word says either that the chariot wheels were broken or that they were bound up or locked up. In fact, one Jewish translation I've read says they were locked up. How could this be? Well, some type of heat beam coming down from the pillar cloud of fire could have caused these problems, either to break off the axles, or the axles have been made of metal, so would the hubs. It would only take a little bit of heat to cause them to expand enough so that the wheels would not turn on the axles, and they would freeze up, lock up, and then the chariots would not drive well. So I suspect that that's what happened. This is an astounding, what you might call, piece of data, or what I call an environmental impact statement, because even the translators couldn't make sense what word going on here.
All right, Barry, you and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Please stand by. Exo Nation, Reverend Dr. Barry Downing is our special guest. And to find out more about Reverend Dr. Barry Downing, where you can get his books and read online articles, just Google his name. It's that plain, it's that simple. And we'll both be back after the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Reverend Dr. Barry Downing is my special guest this hour, and we're talking about the Bible and flying saucers. And Dr. Downing has a new book out entitled Biblical UFO Revelations. Barry, when we look at the crossing of the Red Sea, and with all these interpretations that are coming out, why isn't the biblical scholarly people more apt to look at everything that happened in the Bible in more modern terms? Why is everything kept back in the way that the people way back then would have looked at things?
Oh, for one thing, I think when you're trained, it will say you take Hebrew and Aramaic and you learn all these languages, your mindset gets absorbed in that culture. And so you're not exactly a modern person because you've devoted your life to understanding people who lived in tents and herded sheep and goats, So it's not easy to make that transition. And I don't blame the people who published the Interpreter's Bible in 1952 for not having caught on to the fact that UFOs might be an issue here. Basically, flying saucers had just barely become a name by 1952. The UFO Roswell crash in 1947 kind of kicked off the modern era. You can't expect biblical scholars to have jumped right in on that at that time. And so that's how it was. I would say, in terms of how I got to this point, it was because of just feeling that the science-religion conflict had made it so that Christianity wasn't really viable in our modern culture. That's how I felt. So I felt something needed to be done.
All right, let's say disclosure takes place. Will the consequences be different for Catholics than Protestants, Jews and Muslims, Hindus and Buddhists?
Okay, good question. Obviously, I'm not a specialist in Eastern religions. Dr. Richard Thompson has written a book called Alien Identities, and he's a student of the Upanishads, and he feels that there are many images of UFOs and kind of alien contacts in the Hindu tradition. So those things are there. I think that both Buddhism and Hinduism would be relatively unshook up, I guess I would say, by revelation that UFOs are there and that aliens are there. The Hindus believe in multiple gods, and so I think adjusting to the idea that there are superior beings flying around in our skies they'd be okay with that.
But when I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
The impact on Judaism and Christianity, I would say, would be primary. I don't see a lot being written by Muslim writers. There's a little on it, and certainly the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions overlap. Moses, maybe his dates around 1200 to 1000 BC, depending on whether or not you think he was just a literary figure like Hamlet or whether he really lived. And Jesus, of course, from around 4 BC on. And then Muhammad, maybe 600 years, I believe, after Jesus. So those are the three major religious figures in the West. And Muhammad believed in both Moses and Jesus prophets. He just didn't believe in Jesus as a divine figure. He saw him just as a prophet, like Elijah or Moses. Mm-hmm. And I think he saw himself as another prophet. Now, whether or not Muslims would want to suppose that Muhammad had some kind of alien contact that gave him the visions he had, he reported, visitations from the angel Gabriel that gave him the Quran and the visions for the Quran. So I think that Muslims would have to deal with that question somewhat. The issues for Jews and Christians, I think, is a very big issue. Jewish people have not reacted much to it. Stanton Friedman, who lives in Canada, sure, and is a good friend and has been very supportive of me, even though, his faith point of view, I would say, is not strong in either the Jewish direction or any other direction, mm-hmm. But he respects people who have religious views, and he respects the work that I've done. I'm thankful for that. But the Jewish story of the Exodus, to me, is the story of an alien power, and I could also call it an angelic power, which planned the whole thing from Passover right up through the Red Sea into the wilderness where manna is dropped from the sky, I suspect from the pillar, cloud, and the fire. The Exodus UFO lands on Mount Sinai, gives Moses not only the 10 commandments, but 600 plus commandments, and the formation of the Jewish religion. So from my point of view, the Jewish religion is an extraterrestrial made religion. Whether or not these beings are angelic in the sense that traditional theology has thought of them, mm-hmm. or whether they're highly evolved beings from some other solar system or some other galaxy, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. We didn't even know there was more than one galaxy until about 100 years ago. We thought it was just all the Milky Way. And it wasn't until I think we got the Hubble telescope up there that we could begin to decide that, wow, some of these stars aren't stars. They're actually other galaxies. So our expanding knowledge of the universe in the last 100 years is mind-boggling. And it's not surprising that theology has been kind of way behind in trying to catch up with this. In terms of how close we are to disclosure, which was the question you asked 5 minutes ago, the problem is it has to appear to be in the government's interest to disclose UFO reality, I think. And I don't see what's in it for the government to do it. How does the government benefit? It's not whether or not we, the people, benefit. How does any government benefit by saying, yep, aliens are here, they're quite smart, their technology is very good, it's better than ours, unless there's something obvious that will empower our leaders that the the release of UFO information would lead to. I don't see it happening.
But why wouldn't they look at the coming out with the information in disclosure that this could actually prove that the Bible is real and prove that everything that has been said and prophesied is real, and look at the entrance of the extraterrestrials as the second coming of Christ?
Right. So that's exactly what they would not want.
Okay. But why? But why? The entire basis is of the government is in God we trust.
Yeah. Right. It's good of you to say that. All right, let's back up a bit.
Okay.
Uh, the Think about Pharaoh and Moses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Moses came to Pharaoh and said, "I come to you, our God. Our God wants us to go into the wilderness to worship him." Pharaoh doesn't want any of that, you know. He fights Moses every step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
He lies to Moses, says, "Okay, maybe I'll go with you after the plague of flies or after the plague of frogs," but he keeps going back on his word.
Right.
Or you go to the New Testament. The wise men come to Herod and say, "Hey, we've seen this star in the eye. We got a star in the sky. We think the Savior's here. Oh, good. Let me know where he is. I'll come and worship him," you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that was baloney. Okay. The earthly powers see heavenly powers as competition. You know, you and I don't see them as competition, but
Yeah.
if you're a political leader, you see UFOs as potentially competition for adoration, competition for respect. And furthermore, if you can't imagine how much money is being spent on keeping the UFO secret now. I mean, you've got a lot of secret keepers. And, you know, what was it? A guy named Rumsfeld, who was Secretary of Defense back in 2001, said that there was over $2 trillion in defense money that was unaccounted for. I mean, you can buy a lot of silence.
But here's my question now, and I've got to go to our final break after this question, Barry, and I'd like you to think about it over the break. If the President of the United States cannot have an affair in the most secure building in the world without the rest of the world knowing about it later on, how in the name of God can you hide the existence of extraterrestrials and UFOs from the people? It makes no sense to me. Stand by.
Yep.
All right, we're going to come back, and I look forward to your answer on that. Exonation Doctor, Reverend Dr. Barry Downing is my guest this hour. We're talking to Barry about his books, The Bible and Flying Saucers, and his new book entitled Biblical UFO Revelations. And if you'd like to find out more about Reverend Dr. Barry Downing, just Google his name and all the information will be found, as well as the articles that he has written. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And don't forget, you can always listen to the X Zone Broadcast Network with our compliments and see what programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 at www.xzbn.net. Welcome back, everyone. Reverend Dr. Barry Downing is our special guest this hour. And first of all, Barry, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's a great pleasure talking to you again after all these years. But, you know, my question basically was, how can they maintain disclosure and the secrecy when everyone found out about, you know, Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky, and the rest of them?
All right, let me go at it from UFO point of view first.
Okay.
March 12, 2015, talk show host Jimmy Kimmel interviewed President Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And during that, he stated if he were president, first thing he would do is seek out the truth about Area 51 and UFOs. After some going back and forth, and this stuff is on the internet if anybody wants to check, in answer to the question about UFOs, Obama said, "I can't reveal anything." Kimmel then said that he had President Clinton on the show and asked him the same question. And Clinton said he looked into it and didn't find anything. Obama replied, "That's what we're instructed to say." Who are the instructors? Well, they're the guys that have the money, okay? They're paid the money to keep the UFO secrets. And it's different. It's different. UFOs are from sex, okay? John Kennedy had a lot of affairs going, but it was not published because there was a gentleman's agreement among the press. It didn't publish the affairs of the president in those days. It's all different now in regard to sex, but it's not different so far in regard to UFOs. So far, the press is willing to agree that UFOs are a national security issue. Sex is not a national security issue. So I think that's how the lid is kept on. Why we haven't had Edward Snowden, who would dump secret UFO reports out, I don't know. Partly, I wonder if the press itself thinks that UFOs are too dangerous for the culture to absorb, and therefore they're willing to keep UFOs a secret. I was talking with a local newspaper editor many years ago, maybe not more than 10 years after the Bible and Flying Saucers are published. He said to me, "I think what you're doing is very dangerous." And I think he meant that it would be destructive of the culture if my kind of views ever came out into the open and were accepted by the public. So I think there's a general sense of responsibility to the culture to go with the government on keeping this covered up. Victor Marchetti wrote a book called The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence. And one of the things he said is that there is someone on the payroll of the CIA in every major media center in the United States. So I think that the control power is there for in regard to UFOs. Think of the planes, the supersonic planes that were developed, and they weren't flown by UFO guys. They were flown by our guys for years, and we didn't know them about the first Iraq War. Suddenly, the stealth bombers were doing their stuff, and the newspapers never printed a copy of a photo of these things or anything. So the press was willing to help with the cover-up of stealth aircraft, and I think they're willing to help with the cover-up in regard to UFOs. And that's kind of where we are. What could break it? I don't know. I think it would have to break outside the United States first. Or the other thing is that one of the religious UFO sightings is Fatima, Portugal in 1917. And since we're running to the end, I won't give details on this. I do talk about it in detail in my new book. But basically, something that was called a miracle. It was a silver disc spinning that came down the sky and was seen by 50,000 people. If the same kind of disc were to hover over a football game, either in Canada or the United States, with 50,000 people watching, I think that would break the lie. That would be the end. Then we'd go to disclosure.
So if it happened in Fatima, why hasn't it happened anywhere else?
Because the guys in charge of the UFOs don't want to happen yet. So I'm as much disturbed by the guys in charge. And if it's God and his angels, okay, then my prayer life is focused on them and said, what are you guys waiting for?
Yeah.
You know, I think we need the truth. I think our culture needs the truth. I don't think we need the lies to go on. And I just feel like our culture is decaying at a very rapid rate. Maybe I'm old and that's it, but that's how I feel. And unless we can kind of recover a sense that we've been created by a God who has a purpose for us and loves us, and that killing to gain an identity is not a good way to go at it. And yet so much of this is in our culture, in our media, in our films, our TV shows. That's what we got.
What would you say to the question, was Jesus Christ an extraterrestrial?
Okay, that's obviously a dangerous question, which to just say, yes, he's an extraterrestrial could get me tried for heresy, I suppose. But in the Nicene Creed, it says that Jesus came down from heaven for our salvation, became incarnate by the Virgin Mary, and so on. So actually, to say that Jesus came from another world is a fundamental teaching of the Nicene Creed. Jesus in John chapter 6, verse 38 says, "For I came down from heaven, not to do my own will, but to do the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that all who are given to me, none should be lost, but that I should raise them up on the last day." So that's kind of the nutshell image of who Jesus saw himself as, according to John's Gospel. Now, the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, never phrase it quite this way. But at the same time, I think the best way to make sense of how Jesus could turn water to wine, could feed 5,000 with a few loaves of bread, could heal the blind, the lame, make the lame walk, could raise the dead. This means, to me, he had powers that humans don't have. And where did these powers come from? I think they came from another world, a heavenly world, the world from which Jesus came. Because Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. You are of this world, I am not of this world. It seems clear that he had a pre-existence before he came to earth. And then, of course, Acts chapter 1, Jesus ascends to heaven. He goes back to where he came from. So I think to say that Jesus is an extraterrestrial is biblically correct. It's correct according to the Nicene Creed.
Yeah.
But to say he came from Mars, I wouldn't say that. But he's come from some world, not on Earth.
If Moses really didn't exist, how can we be sure that anything in the Bible is real?
Probably you can't, okay? I think this is where faith is an issue. Read Hebrews chapter 11. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the assurance of things not seen. So that faith is not like science in the sense that science works to get absolute proof of what they've got. I don't think people of faith can ever get absolute proof until we die and get on the other side. So believing in Moses, believing in Jesus is an act of faith for me. The reason I've been working on the science side is that too many people, like Richard Dawkins, who wrote The God Delusion, seem to have a field day of saying all the stuff in the Bible is scientifically impossible. I can't prove that the Red Sea parted, okay, but I can make it plausible. And if I can make it plausible, I feel I've done enough. The faith has to take you the rest of the way.
Got about a minute and a half left here, Barry. Here's my final question to you. If you are wrong in your beliefs about UFOs, what will God say to you on the day of judgment?
Yeah, well, it could be bad. Let's say. My hope is that the God of the Bible is a forgiving God. That's what I'm counting on, and not just about my UFO stuff.
Right.
Right. And so I think that God understands that I've been trying to to make a witness for the possibility that the things reported in the scriptures are true, and that they're true about God. We in modern times, I think, have trouble distinguishing between the God of the Bible, who appears, we'll say, at the burning bush or in the pillar of cloud and fire or in angelic form, which is a physical form, from the God who is everywhere. In my second book, instead of talking about God being immanent, I talk about him being everywhere. And so part of the problem for theology is to distinguish between the everywhere God, which you can't see and you can't touch, and the God who can appear in physical forms, in angelic forms. And of course, Jesus is the ultimate angelic form from a Christian point of view.
Barry, our time is up for tonight, but I do want to thank you ever so much for coming back to the X Zone after all these years. I wish you continued success, and please keep up your great work. You're an inspiration to many people.
Thank you, Rob.
Take care of yourself, my friend. Blessings.
Yep.
God bless you too, sir. Exonation, my guest this hour has been the Reverend Dr. Barry Downing. And for more information about him, all you have to do is just Google his name, Reverend Dr. Barry Downing, UFOs, and you'll find everything you need, including how to get copies of his books. They're always a great read. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour as we continue here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget, you can always find out what's going on here in the X Zone and the other great shows that we have on the X Zone Broadcast Network simply by going to www.xzbn.net. I'll be back after this break with the news. Don't go away.